Oh.
Alrighty.
Okay.
Ready? Okay. All right. So this is Duties of a Regional Rapier Marshal. I am Don Cornelius Marylainen, and my camera is a little bit off there. So if I'm not looking at you, that's fine, because most of this will probably be on a slideshow anyway. But if I look to be staring off in the distance, that's just this dumb computer. So we want to start off in the proper place. All right. So first things first. First job that you're going to have to do as a regional marshal, first duty you'll have to do is managing your local marshals. It should be fairly obvious. Every regional marshal is going to have local marshals for any group that is holding a practice, whether it's a barony, whether it's a canton. Here in the north, we have 4 or 5 baronies and a province, all of which hold practices. I think maybe one canton is holding practice, one of North Cape cantons, possibly 2 of them are holding practice. So I say that, I should know, because they would have marshals. Not thinking about it, they don't have a marshal, so I guess they're not holding practice. Or if they are, they're not holding official practices. They wouldn't be doing it right now anyways with COVID. So, but just so you know, the first job you're going to do as a regional marshal is to manage your local marshals. First thing that we usually deal with when we think about managing the local marshals is reports. Well, we have at least 3 different types of reports, including practice reports, event reports, and injury reports. And the things we're looking for is to make sure that they are being reported in a timely manner. The practice reports are due on the 5th of every month of the following month. So if your local marshal is doing a practice for September for this month, then that report would be due by October 5th. Events here, it says actually within 30 days of the event. That's from the OnStira website when it goes to the OnStira forms page. I know there's been a little bit of confusion on this, because I'm not sure that's the actual time. A lot of people, especially in the past 6 months, 12 months, have said that event forms should be returned or should be turned in within 10 days of the event. So, like I said, I'm quoting this from the OnStira forums page. This may actually be incorrect. This is something I would have to check with the Kingdom Regional Marshal to find out whether or not there's actually any differences. But according to what I can find on the OnStira page, this is what they're looking at. Injury reports. Injury reports need to be reported as soon as possible, within 24 hours. Typically, that's 24 hours from when it happens. If somebody is considering a minor injury, something that they aren't going to be required to go to the hospital, you don't necessarily have to report it at that time. However, if they decide that the injury is worse than they originally thought and that they are going to go to the hospital, then from the time that they decide to do that, it needs to be reported within 24 hours. Secondly, you need to make sure that it contains all required content. This would include the number of practices. Right now, most places will have no practices. However, we are still required, or the local marshals are still required to file practice reports every month. So even if there aren't any practices, they need to say, yes, here's our report. We had 0 practices this month. Other things that they would include is the number of participants. One of the comments that Etienne, our Kingdom Rapier Marshal, has mentioned is that there is at least 1 or 2 people, and actually I think it's one of the people from the north, who wrote down that they had 4 participants but 0 practices. And that might mean that they have 4 active rapier fighters, but if those rapier fighters are not actually going to a practice, then they aren't included as participants. So we would say 0 participants, not 4 participants. So again, you have to make sure it has all the required content and that it's the correct content. In the case of an injury, you want to make sure that you talk about what happened, whether or not it is a something that is potentially a problem with the person that threw a shot, for example. Was the shot excessive? Was it a failed guard attempt? Did something break and did that cause an injury? I broke my finger once, and I was intercepting a lunge towards my chest, and I parried it, but it went through my guard and hit my finger. So I ended up breaking my finger because I was trying to guard it about 2 feet away from where it was. The shot wasn't excessive, but I met it, 2 feet ahead of where it was supposed to land, and there was a lot more force as a result. So it was just a bad parry. right? And that's what I wrote, or that's what they said on the injury report, is it wasn't a failure, it wasn't a problem with the person initiating the attack, it was just bad luck, bad parry. Also, one of the things that they need to include are things like if there's broken blades. Typically, you include pictures of that. That would probably fall under the injury report. I think you actually have to respond within 24 hours if there's a broken blade. At the very least, though, you have to make sure that it's on the practice report. So the second thing involving your local marshals, that is knowledge. As the regional marshal, you need to make sure that your local marshals are kept up to date when it comes to rule changes. We had the 2020 rules came out earlier this year. We talked about them a bit at Roundtable, but we actually talked about them a bit before that, because I think they were actually released in April, and I made sure that all the local marshals knew that the rules were coming out, that they've been passed, that they weren't necessarily going into effect until Roundtable, but that they should brush up on the rules and understand them once they did go into effect. The second thing, as far as knowledge, is answering or clarifying answers regarding rules. Sometimes you'll come across a rule, or you'll see a change in a rule that went missing. The most recent one that I can think of is that there used to be a rule involving blade grabbing, where if it became a wrestling match, like the person's holding on the blade and they're basically going with it so as not to lose their hand, that a marshal could call for a hold and a break to make sure that nobody gets injured in the process. That little piece that talks about marshals separating from a wrestling match on a blade grab was removed from the most recent version of these rules, which they may have done that simply to encourage people that if you grab a blade and somebody pulls on it, that you automatically lose a hand, so to limit the actual possibilities of wrestling. So that's one of the cases where we have to clarify: is wrestling no longer a thing? Is it now considered, if somebody tries to take their blade back and you're holding onto it, is that considered an automatic draw and cut on the hand? It's something that is at this point up to debate, and it's actually something I brought up with KRM, and something I will be talking to him about tomorrow, because that's something I want to clarify for one of my local marshals. Finally, as far as managing local marshals, there is the maintaining, releasing, and replacing of marshals. In order to maintain a marshal, all you really need to do is confirm the eligibility of membership. All local marshals have to be members. They have to be paid members. And also to make sure that their marshal authorizations are up to date. Since you, as a regional marshal, are also an authorizing marshal, this is usually fairly easy. All they have to do is go to the authorization page and request that you reauthorize them, and you'll get an email. You click yes. This person, in my view, is a acceptable marshal, and that'll fix their authorization. So that's usually a fairly easy thing to do. You also need to, and I'm going to step down to step 4 here, make sure that their warranting is up to date. When we had Roundtable this last, a month or 2 ago, Pug wanted to make sure that everybody, all the local marshals, memberships did not run out before January 1st, before the next Roundtable. So that was one of the things that we were pushing, is to make sure people who had their memberships running out in October, November, December were actually going to have to pay for another year, so that they wouldn't end up losing their membership before they lost their warrant. And this is mainly just to make sure that you end up with people, you end up just to make sure that you don't have people who are warranted in one of these positions when they're not eligible to be warranted. So, because that can cause legal problems. Second thing, when you're replacing a marshal, is you need to review applications. All people wanting to become marshals will apply for those positions, and potentially interview candidates. Chances are, if you're a regional marshal, you probably know a lot of the local marshals. You probably know a lot of the people fairly well, and for reasons I'm going to get into in a little bit when I get to the next pages. You may not have to interview candidates, but if it's somebody who's relatively new to you, you may want to interview. More than likely, though, you probably know the people, and there's a fair chance you may even already encourage them to apply for the position. So it really depends on how well you know the person. And then, of course, the third step: discuss the candidates with the local heads of the branch, the B&B and or the seneschal. And you want to do this because if there is potential problems between the candidate, and the B&B or the seneschal, they also have to work with that person. So if you're putting somebody into that position that is going to cause problems with the local group, then you may not want to make that person your marshal, right? You don't necessarily have to say, okay, absolutely no, I'm gonna disregard this person, but at the very least, you should talk to the B&B, talk to the seneschal, find out what the potential problems are, see if it's something that you can collectively discuss with them and the candidate. And if you decide that everybody's fine with it, you can go ahead and make that person your marshal. If it's not, then hopefully you have somebody else, because sometimes you only have one choice. And if you run into a situation where they just would rather not have a choice, then you end up with a group that doesn't have a marshal and potentially not having practices. All right, so next page. If I can get this to work. Yep, it will work. There we go. Okay, so I've talked about managing the lower marshals. Now we have to talk to the Kingdom Rapier Marshal. The first thing you need to do is, just like you accept reports from the local marshals, you also have to supply a quarterly report. This is actually my weak point. The reason this is my weak point is because the first time I was Northern Regional Marshal, the Kingdom Rapier Marshal was made Marshal at the exact same time, that same day I was, and they were a resident of the Barony of Wiesenfeuer, which means they went to all the practices I went to. They went to pretty much all the events I went to. So when it came to doing reports, Master Donovan, who was the KRM, just talked to me personally. He didn't worry about me filing a report. He basically just talked to me quarterly, one-on-one, saying, yeah, hey, are there any issues with any of this? Is there anything I can do? And we just had a conversation. So when I became Regional Marshal the second time, I was not sure exactly when all the reports had to be done. I emailed Master Mateo and asking, do you want quarterly reports? Do you want them emailed? How should they be presented? I did the same thing with Etienne, but I wasn't aware when they were due, and that actually became a problem because apparently they were due the 15th of this month, and I was thinking they were due the 15th of next month. So it was my intention to do a quarterly report like within the next few days, so that at the beginning of the month, or by the 5th of October, Master Etienne would have all the information he needed from me. But of course, I was wrong. They're actually a month ahead, apparently. So that's one of the things you need to ask, when is this going to be due? And also what content needs to be presented. Are we listing all the reports that were put in? Or are we only talking about people who are, potentially having issues with not doing reports, or people who are presenting the wrong content, or is there something else that they really want to know about what's going on as far as the individual practices are concerned, or just even how the region is handling things? So that's something that you would need to talk to your KRM. Again, like I said, I'm actually planning on talking to Etienne tomorrow about all this. Secondly, knowledge. Again, you're going to see some repetition here, as you are the authority for knowledge when it comes to your local marshals. There may be situations where you need to get knowledge from the KRM or even the Earl Marshal. Using the example I talked about in the previous page, if we no longer have wrestling, if the rule on wrestling was taken out of the Rapier rules, and it assumes that they're now handling a blade and it's going to be an automatic cut, then that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. However, it becomes an issue because I gave a class on spear marshaling about a month ago, and the rules on spear marshaling basically follow the rules for rapier marshaling, meaning that if you get into a grappling match by somebody grabbing your spear and then you start becoming a wrestling match for that spear, you need to tell them to go ahead and just let go of the spear and potentially cause a break. Well, since they've now excised the whole piece of letting go, causing a break, or calling a break from the rapier rules, the people that are trying to enforce the spear rules no longer have that to look back upon. They can't say, well, here in the Rapier rules, it says that if there's wrestling, I as the marshal need to go ahead and break it up because those are no longer in the rules. As a spear marshal, I know that that's the case, but we don't actually have a separate list of all the rules for spear inside fighting. It's more of a, hey, use the Rapier rules, and then here are a few more rules specific to spear only. So we kind of have a gap here, and this is actually something that I need to talk to Etienne and Don Pug about, who's the Earl Marshal, so that we can get some clarification on it. I'm assuming that the wrestling rules still apply. They did when it was during the experiment, but unless you were actually part of the experiment, you wouldn't necessarily know that. And if you're new to Rapier and you never saw that they were rules about wrestling weapons, then you would not know to apply that over to spear rules. So. And then, of course, for the Kingdom Rapier Marshal, there are special considerations. If you're stepping down from a regional position, for example, you need to be able to talk to the Kingdom Rapier Marshal because you're going to be looking for your replacement. Your replacement needs to be somebody that your Kingdom Rapier Marshal can work with. So when I stepped down last time, I had four applicants for the position. And I basically just wrote a summary report of all the applications. I forwarded the applications to Master Mateo, and then I gave a summary report of my impressions of all the different applicants. Good points, bad points. I had 4 good applicants, but everybody had something that was a strong point and something that was potentially a weak point on them. And I gave him all the points, and I let him decide for himself. So it's a special consideration. Another special consideration I've had to deal with recently is I've had a marshal who lives in an area, in this case Adlersruhe, that has a very small active populace, not a lot of people to choose from, and her time as marshal was ending. You're only normally supposed to hold the position for 2 years, but you can get an extension for an extra year. And I needed to see about having her extended for another year because they didn't have another person to take her place. And they were so low on people that if they lost one of their people, one of their officers, they would no longer end up having a group. So again, another special consideration. Third, the visible regional. One of the things to remember as a regional marshal is that you represent the kingdom to the region. Okay, you are officially a deputy to the kingdom, and as such, you should be. If you're in this position, you should be visible, which means that you should attend all regional tournaments for more than one reason. One is to be visible. The secondly is because normally when you have a regional tournament or any tournament, there is a marshal in charge. Oftentimes the marshal in charge, usually the marshal in charge is whoever is the local marshal for that group. Sometimes it is the previous champion, whoever the current champion is. So for example, if I was running a tournament as the Namron champion in a few days, if we were actually having that tournament, then either Lady Sabine or myself would most likely be the marshal in charge. Since I'm the regional marshal, that disqualifies me from being the marshal in charge for the tournament. So I would want to have Sabine be the MIC. The reason you don't want to serve as the marshal in charge is because you need to have a point of elevation. The marshal in charge is technically the person that runs everything for the day, but the marshal in charge needs to have somebody they can report up the line if they get out of hand. And that would be the regional marshal, or if available, the kingdom marshal. Secondly, attend all regional fighter practices. You're the regional marshal, you should be there. You can serve as the hosting marshal, but you should have another local officer present. So, for example, if I am going out to one of the distant cantons and I want to host a regional fighter practice, I can serve as the marshal there, but I should have a local marshal, a local officer there as well, ideally the seneschal, but at least one local officer should be present. That way they do have somebody representing the local group. So. Third, you should make yourself available to all branch leaders. And I've already discussed why we should do this because the more approachable you are, the more they know who you are, the more comfortable they will feel talking with you. If there's a problem with their practice, if there's a problem with their marshal, if there's a problem with some of the people there, or if they just want to develop a practice in their area. Maybe they don't have any local marshals. Maybe they would like you to come out and teach people so that you can have local marshals. We had this a lot with the canton of Haltry. I don't know whether or not they actually, I know they don't have an official group marshal there, but I think they might actually now have a local marshal. And so long as they have a local marshal and they have a seneschal or one of their other officers, they can officially hold practice. They just need to have whoever that officer is writing the reports. And that's actually one of the reasons I became a regional marshal in the first place, is because I wanted to help develop these smaller groups that don't have marshals and can't hold practices. Fourth reason, in representing the kingdom, you are the acting authority for local fighters and marshals. This kind of goes back again to the first page, in that your local marshals, if they have an issue, should be coming to you. Okay. If you're not able to settle that issue, then it goes up the chain to the kingdom Rapier Marshal, and then up the chain to the Earl Marshal, and then potentially to the king and queen or the kingdom seneschal, depending on what the actual issue is. But because you're the acting authority, the local fighters, not just the group's marshals, but the local fighters and the local marshals should know that they can turn to you if they have questions. You are the local authority. You should have the knowledge, or if not the knowledge on hand in your head, the ability to find that knowledge so you can provide it to them, present it to them, and help settle any disputes that they might have. The second part of being a visible regional is that you represent the region to the kingdom. One way you can do this is making sure that you attend Roundtable. As regional marshal, I always try to attend every Roundtable if I can. This is a good time for all the regional marshals to get together and talk. It's a good time to talk with the KRM one-to-one, with the Earl Marshal one-to-one, and marshals of other groups. You know, I'll usually go to the, I'm an archery marshal, so I usually go to the archery group. I'm not a youth rapier marshal, but I usually go to the youth rapier meetings as well. It's just a good time to talk with everybody, to let everybody know what's going on, ask questions, and basically, like I said, represent your region. Second part of this, I just actually covered this, is maintain a rapport with the KRM, the Earl Marshal, and the deputies, including other regional marshals, including youth rapier marshals. Basically, just let people know that that you're there, you know, that you can help if they need your help, whether it's helping in your region, or if, you know, I've had people, regional marshals from other areas ask me questions, especially when it came to, for example, spears, because they weren't necessarily part of that experiment, whereas I was. So it's a way you can move or expand beyond your region to actually helping the other regions, helping all the other people at your level, and, you know, helping on behalf of the people above you. And then finally, taking responsibility for regional issues. So if you do have problems, if somebody's acting up, if somebody's not obeying the rules in one of your groups and you hear about it, you take responsibility for it. You go in there and, I hate to say stomp it, but if you have to, you stomp it. You know, if you need to come down hard on something, if you, or, you know, or encourage it. If you taking responsibility is also trying to promote activity in certain areas. Traveling to some of these smaller areas so that they can have a practice, so they have a chance to learn the basics of rapier fighting and learn the basics of rapier marshaling, and potentially get them authorized as fighters and marshals, so that they can have practices of their own, or at very least go to other events and fight. Next page, regional authority. As a regional authority, you have a number of jobs. One is settling disputes. This generally happens in a tournament. Again, as I said before, typically this is handled by the marshal in charge. The regional is usually strictly there should something become elevated beyond the marshal in charge's control. And in a case like that, the marshal in charge will usually bring it to you. This may happen if the marshal in charge is, you know, still trying to run a tournament. A lot of times what happens when there's a dispute is pull the people aside who are having a dispute and say, okay, these are the options we have for you. And if they can't just agree with it, we're like, well, the tournament's not going to wait. So we're going to continue running the tournament. If you guys can't come to an agreement, then I may just have to give you a fail for both of these, so you lose this round. Both of you take a loss to this round. Ideally, you're going to encourage multiple acceptable results. That's the second line. Encourage them to refight. If you need to have somebody fight without an arm, start the fight where if somebody was wounded, restart the fight with them, that person maintaining their wound. Continue from that point. I am happy to step in. I'm happy to say, okay, neither of you are comfortable with fighting each other, then I will fight both of you. And I will fight you individually, and you'll take your win-loss depending on whether or not you beat me. I'm perfectly happy to do that. It actually has not come to that, but it's an option, right? And if they're agreeable to it, why not? So, third, it can be elevated to a principal if the agreement can't be reached. Principal in this case is whoever's running the event, usually a local baron and baroness, possibly seneschal. They can basically do the same thing. Say, okay, well, we're just going to give you a loss for each one. It's our event. We're basically holding this tournament at our desire. So if we desired you both to take a loss on that round, then that's what's going to happen. You're now free to continue with the rest of the tournament. So that's a fairly easy way to do it. However, if there is a problem with somebody blatantly or continually violating the rules, then ejection for the tournament is certainly a possibility. If there's a problem with somebody continuously hitting somebody hard, if there's a problem with somebody continually calling blows, obviously you want to give them a warning first and say, hey, rule number one, don't be a dick. Okay. If you're continuing to hit somebody hard, if you're continually not to call shots, then speak to them. Say, yeah, this is what we're seeing. Just be, try to control yourself a bit more. Try to be more receptive to, whether or not something actually hit you, and be fair about it. And if they refuse, if they just continue to not follow the rules, then don't be afraid of ejecting them. You have that authority. Okay. You can potentially recommend them to be revoked. I'm going to get over that in just a second. Second thing is a regional authority is authorizing fighters and marshals. As a regional marshal, you are, at least in my case, and every case that in my experience that I've run into, the person who becomes regional marshal also becomes an authorizing marshal. That means that you can make fighters and you can make marshals. New authorizations require the marshal secretary to process a request. So what you would do, I'm not going to go through the entire authorization process. That is something that actually would require its own class, actually probably two classes, one for authorizing fighters, one for authorizing marshals. And I know that because I've taught both classes. So I'm not going to go through the process of doing it. Just know that for new authorizations, you do have to submit the forms to the marshal secretary, so the marshal secretary can get that information into the computer and get that person made into a fighter or a marshal. If somebody is looking for a reauthorization, they can go to a separate page for that. They can click on your name, click what authorization they're looking for, and it'll send an email to you, and all you have to do is say, yes, I approve this, or you can say, no, I don't approve it. And that person will get their authorization, or they won't. Rejecting and revoking authorizations. Again, if you want to revoke an authorization, you have to talk to the marshal secretary. We don't have the ability to go in and take somebody's name off the list. Okay, we don't have that ability. We can tell everybody, hey, I am sending this information to the marshal secretary to have somebody revoked of their authorizations, because as an authorizing marshal, that I am within my right to do that. So don't, if this person brings the card to you, just let you know, no, they aren't an authorized fighter by my standpoint. They may still be in the computer, but that should be getting changed soon. And that is actually the second step here. If you are looking to revoke somebody or even reject somebody for an authorization, you should report it to the KRM, potentially. You should report it to your regionals and ideally other authorizing marshals, certainly in the case of revoking and potentially in the case of rejecting. If you're not rejecting somebody because you just don't think they're ready and you're going to say, you know what, I'll tell you what, I will come back in 2 weeks and we will look at you again. And if I think you've improved, if I think you know the rules better, then, you know, I'll go ahead and authorize you then. But if it's just somebody who what we call authorization hunting, it's somebody who's just going to go from one authorizing marshal to another authorizing marshal saying, hey, can you authorize me? And then, hey, can you authorize me? And they just keep on going through the loop. We don't want that to happen, because if one person rejected them, then the others should know why that person was rejected. They should actually actively trying to fix the problems rather than just going and trying to find somebody else to authorize them. So. And finally, should I apply? Why you should be a regional marshal. Reasons why you should be a regional marshal are, you want to better serve the community. This is why I became a regional marshal in the first place. I had any number of people come up to me and say, hey, could you authorize me as a fighter? Or, hey, could you authorize me as a marshal? And at the time, I was not an authorizing marshal, so I could say no. I know people who can, but unfortunately, they are not here. And this would happen a lot at events, for tournaments. So they'd be like, I'd really like to be able to fight in this tournament, but I'm not an authorized fighter. Well, I can actually take people aside if I know ahead of time, have them talk to me the night before or whatever, and say, you know what, I'm going to get together with you. I'll go over the rules with you. I'll have you do some test fights. And, I have the paperwork right here. If I believe that you are a safe fighter, if I believe you're a competent fighter, that you know the rules, then I will go ahead and fill out this form for to authorize you. And I'll let the marshal in charge know, and we'll go ahead and let you fight. But otherwise, so that was one of the reasons why I wanted to become a regional, is because I wanted to be able to do that. The other reason I wanted to become a regional is because I wanted to be able to, as I mentioned before, help develop other communities that didn't have their own local marshals, so they couldn't hold practices. So wanting to better serve your community is one reason. Another reason, you have the means and availability to attend many events. As I said before, I believe in the case of a regional marshal, you should be attending all of your region's tournaments. You should be attending all of your region's regional practices. If you are looking to become a regional marshal and there are 10 tournaments in your region over the course of the year and you go to 2 of them, you should not be a regional marshal, okay? You are not being the visible marshal that you need to be, okay? You're generally well known in the community, or you are capable of being so. This has to do with your ability to create a rapport with the local fighters, with the local marshals, with the group marshals. You don't necessarily have to be well known to begin with, but if you have the capability of being able to go out and introduce yourself to people, being able to talk to people, especially in your community, in the Rapier community, or whatever community you're looking to serve, depending on what regional job you're looking for, it helps if you're already well known. But if you're not, but you're still capable of doing that, if you're comfortable being around lots of people, if you're comfortable with having people come to you, then maybe you want to be a regional marshal. Fourth one, you're able to remain personable while serving as an authority and 2 authorities. This is not a job that you should take if you're looking for an ego trip, okay? Your job is to serve. You are serving under authorities, and you are providing a service to the people who work for you as an authority. If you can't remain personable, if you can't keep things friendly with your local marshals, if you are just going to berate them, you need to be able to exert authority, but you can do it kindly, okay? Tough but fair, basically. Or firm but fair, if that sounds better to you. Just, again, rule number 1, be the authority, but don't be a dick about it. And 5, if you previously served as a marshal for a local branch. I would highly recommend that if you're going to be a regional marshal, that first you be a marshal for a local branch. One reason for this is that you understand all the workings of everything that you need to do as a local marshal. I served as a deputy regional marshal within 4 months of my starting practicing Rapier, and I became the local marshal for Namron 6 months after that. The current marshal had to move out of the out of our branch. They moved from Namron up to Northkeep, and so they weren't able to maintain that position anymore. And myself as the deputy, I stepped up into the position. So if you are a local marshal, not only are you used to running practices, used to being marshal in charge, but you're also used to reporting to a regional marshal. So it helps you to understand not only your position, but also the regional marshal position, and it helps you as a regional marshal to understand what your local marshals are going through. So yeah, definitely. It's not an absolute requirement, but if you can learn, you can serve as a local officer for some position, and you get that experience, whether or not it's a seneschal, whether or not it's a rapier marshal, whether or not it's an archery marshal, any of those things will definitely help to your ability to become a regional officer in whatever position you're looking for. Reasons why you shouldn't become a regional marshal, assuming that you meet, and this is assuming you meet the above criteria. Personal glory, okay? If you are, for example, a cadet, and you're looking to become a White Scarf, and you want to take on the position of a regional marshal because it will look good on your resume, don't do it. That is not the reason to become a regional marshal, okay? Yes, it may look good on your resume, and yes, you may end up being a very good regional marshal. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's not the reason why you should be taking the job. You should be taking the job to do the job, to serve, okay? This is a service position, so don't do it for personal glory. Again, following on the same lines, don't do it for power for the sake of power. I wanted the ability to authorize marshals. I wanted the ability to authorize fighters, but I didn't want it just to say, hey, I can do this. I wanted it because I was confronted by people asking if I could authorize them, asking if I could make them a marshal, asking if I had the ability to say, yes, you can go ahead and fight in this tournament. I had been asked that question numerous times, and I wanted to be able to answer in the affirmative and saying, yes, I can go ahead and take you over here, and I can, go over all this with you and decide whether or not you are, in my opinion, safe and should be allowed to fight in this tournament, or whether or not you should be allowed to become a marshal, or whatever. I wanted that power, but I didn't want it for just having, for the sake of just having that power. I wanted it so that I could serve all these people who wanted to be able to do these things but couldn't. So that I could serve these communities that didn't have a local marshal. The main thing is that, this is a service position. If you are looking to get in this position because you want the power, if you're looking to get in this position because you think it'll make you look better, then don't do it. That's the wrong reason, okay? And if you can say, okay, if you can understand that and realize that it won't necessarily give you the glory you're looking for, that that power is not necessarily all you're hoping it will be, but you still want to serve, you decide, it's worth it to serve, then by all means, at that point, go ahead and apply. So, and that's pretty much it. I believe that's the last slide. It is. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen sharing, and I will go ahead now and open this to questions. Does anybody have any questions so far as what a regional marshal does, or just any questions in general? I don't see I can't tell if anybody's hand raising anything or not.
No, I don't see
I have a
any.
question.
Yes.
You mentioned roundtables. Can you explain a little more about what that is?
Oh, okay. Roundtable is a big it's our big non-event. Is by non-event I mean we don't get all dressed up and everything. We just basically go like this, and it is a time when all of the kingdom marshals and the baron and baronesses and the the principals and all the regional marshals and ideally all the group marshals get together and they discuss rules. They may discuss changes in the rules. They may discuss things that they're looking for as far as potential changes in the rules. And that's, of course, talking about it from a marshal standpoint. A lot of it has to do with what we call warranting. And warranting simply means that the kingdom has given you permission to act as their representative, whether it is a regional marshal, whether it's a local marshal, whether it's as the arts and sciences minister, a seneschal, whatever job that you're looking to do on a local level, on a regional level, or on a kingdom level, typically requires a warrant. And Roundtable is basically our big legal meeting, I guess is the best way to put it. You talk about, the job of the seneschal being all the legal representative behind everything that happens. Roundtable is kind of like the big legal process behind everything. It's a good way to introduce people to new rules. In the case of Ansiora's last roundtable, regarding the Rapier community, one of the things that we talked about were the Rapier rules that came out in 2020. It was a good way to get all of the regional marshals and the local marshals caught up on what these new rules were so that we could explain it to all the other marshals and all the other fighters, and so that we knew what the rules were and make sure that they were being followed. Because of COVID, obviously, there hasn't been a lot of that happening, but it's important for everybody to know. So that's basically what Roundtable is. It's where we get where everybody goes to classes to learn how to be a seneschal, how to be a marshal, not necessarily how to be, it's not an authorization class for a marshal, but it's what you need to know if you're going to become a representative of a group or a region or the kingdom.
Excellent, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Hey, what's up, Redolph?
Hey, quick question. Well, it's going to be a long answer probably. In general terms, can you describe maybe 2 or 3 difficult issues that you've had to deal with in this position?
Thankfully, I have not had to deal with a lot. You'll actually find out that usually rule number 1, people take it to heart. So you don't have a lot of problems as far as like disputes or anything like that in general. I have run into people who were marshal hunting, authorization hunting, and in that case, we actually, when I was the marshal the first year, which is when this happened, we actually had I think it was a Facebook page that was basically a collection of all the recent authorizing marshals, and we would say, hey, this person asked to be authorized. I went ahead and I ran the authorization test on them. I didn't think they were ready, so I did not authorize them. Turned out that person then went to a different area, found a different authorizing marshal, and talked to him. And that authorizing marshal was able to say, well, I see here that you just tried to get authorized by Cornelius. What has changed? That was only a week ago. As I can go ahead and test you, but I'm just letting you know that I already know that you've been denied once. So unless things have actually changed, I'm not going to go ahead and authorize you. You should actually go back to your original person, because that was the person who you asked to authorize you in the first place. Chances are, in a case like that, if you have somebody who is authorization hunting, they probably belong to a specific group. And it should be their local, a regional marshal in their local area that is doing it. Not all areas have regional marshals, though. So sometimes you have to travel. So that would be one situation where something like that's happened. As far as tournaments are concerned, I don't know that I've had to kick anybody out of a tournament. There have been a couple of times when people have been pulled out of tournaments because they disagreed. with each other. They weren't willing to refight it. Somebody was like, I'm clearly the winner. This person's clearly the loser. Well, maybe you should refight it, just to settle it. And they're like, no, we don't want to refight it. I was like, well, this tournament's going to go on without you. So, if you don't want to refight it, then either you're going to miss the rest of the tournament, or we're just going to end up, marking you as a loss for both of you. And that's ultimately what we ended up doing. At that point, it was out of my hands. It went back to the marshal in charge. And I believe that's exactly what happened is, we marked them as a loss. They continued on. The marshal in charge handled it. And there wasn't any further issues with that. I have also run into people who just, hit excessively. Sometimes they don't even know that they're doing it. I do this, right? I've done this when somebody into attack and I counter shoot. It's not intended. I try to break the wrist, but there has been more than one occasion where somebody's rushing at my blade and I'm lunging at the same time, and you get a hard shot. It's not intentional. I something like that happens, I apologize and say that sorry, that's not intentional. And I've never had a problem with it. People go like, oh, okay, cool. And I've taken hard shots myself. So we're not trying to hurt each other. But there are some times where people just have a problem owning up, or they get overly aggressive. This is not actually something I've had to deal with as a marshal. This is actually something that happened to me. My first year of fighting, I was in a meat grinder tournament, North Keats tournament, and I was fighting somebody who, during the first section, those who don't know what a meat grinder tournament, it's basically you're rotating in and out. You keep fighting basically for 10 minutes, and you lose, you win, you go out, and then you get back in line, you go in, and it works like a meat grinder. In this case, I had fought the same person 3 times, not in a row, but 3 times. All 3 times I felt they weren't calling my shots. The last time they legged me and I sat down and they walked off the field like they had won, and I got very upset. And they just, they were unaware. They weren't being conscious of what was going on. They were a newer fighter. I was a newer fighter. But they just weren't paying attention. And I got angry and I continued fighting. And my kill ratio went from about 60% to about 90%, because I was being overly aggressive. I didn't hurt anybody. I didn't even fight that person again, thankfully. But more importantly, I didn't hurt anybody. But I was being overly aggressive. I was defeating people that that on paper I shouldn't have been. I wasn't defeating the person who won, who was Don Trevor. And at that range, there was no chance I was going to beat Don Trevor anyways. But what happened is, in the case of the meat grinder tournament, usually there's about a 5-10 minute break between rounds. Rounds usually last about 20 minutes. During that 5-10 minute break, I sat down and then I decided, I don't want to hurt anybody. I'm going to remove myself from the tournament. This is a case where if I had been a regional marshal and I saw somebody amping up their game overly aggressively as I was being, again, I hadn't hurt anybody, but I was being overly aggressive, where I might have talked to him and said, hey, are you okay? Is anything going wrong? Talk to the person, find out, if they're actually having problems, and try to de-escalate this, the situation. As it turned out, I de-escalated myself by removing myself from the tournament. The rest of it went off without a hitch, and I feel better because, I didn't hurt anybody. And the person who was doing these things was a friend of mine. I didn't want to create issues between us, and I didn't bring it up. And things were fine, and like I said, they were distracted. They didn't realize it was happening. And I just let it go. So, but that's a situation where if I had been the marshal in charge or the regional marshal, where I might have stepped in, pulled me aside and say, check with me and make sure that I was in the right mind frame, make sure that I was going to hurt anybody. And that was basically it. So, is that good? All right.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Welcome. Any other questions? How are we doing on time? 7:55. We only have about 5 minutes. So, anybody else? Yes, no? Okay.
I think you did a really great job, Corny.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Hopefully I didn't talk too fast. So, hopefully everybody got it, and thank you everybody for attending. I hope to see you around. Fight with you guys. Those of you I can fight. Maybe it'll be another 4 to 6 months, but yeah, it'd be good to get in there again. So, but in the meantime, thanks for attending. I'm going to go ahead and head out. Save this recording. I'll go ahead and stop that now.